James Cooper exhaled deeply as he descended the narrow staircase into the basement archives of the Chicago Tribune. At 35, he'd spent the last decade building a respectable career as a documentary filmmaker. But his latest project, a comprehensive look at the life of Muhammad Ali, had hit a creative wall. He needed something unique, something nobody had seen before. "Most of this stuff hasn't been touched in years," said Margot, the newspaper's elderly archivist, her flashlight beam dancing across rows of metal shelving. "We're digitizing everything now, but these old film reels and tapes are low priority." James nodded absently, running his fingers along dusty boxes labeled by year. His research had revealed rumors of an interview Ali had given in Chicago after refusing military induction in 1967, one that was allegedly too controversial to air. "Here's the section from 65 through 70, Margot pointed before checking her watch. "I've got a meeting upstairs. Just pull the cord when you leave." If this story has already made you feel something, however small, don't leave without giving back. Comment and tell me where you're watching this video from, and subscribe to the channel. The silence enveloped James as Margot's footsteps faded. Hours passed as he methodically worked through box after box, finding nothing but standard news segments and local interest stories. Just as fatigue began to set in, a small, unlabeled reel caught his attention. James carefully threaded the film through the archive's projector. The screen flickered to life, and there he was, Muhammad Ali, young and resolute, sitting across from a reporter James didn't recognize. The date stamp read April 28, 1967, just one day after Ali had refused induction into the armed forces. "We're speaking with Cassius Clay, who now calls himself Muhammad Ali," began the interviewer, his tone barely concealing contempt. "I am Muhammad Ali," came the calm correction. "The name given to me by my slave master I no longer accept." James leaned forward, transfixed. This wasn't the bombastic, poetry-reciting showman most footage captured. This Ali was measured, philosophical, and profoundly articulate about his convictions. The 25-minute interview covered his religious conversion, his stance against the Vietnam War, and the price he was willing to pay for his beliefs. "They're about to take everything from you," pressed the interviewer. "Your title, your livelihood, possibly your freedom. Is it worth it?" Ali's eyes, focused and unwavering, seemed to look beyond the camera, beyond the moment, perhaps even into the future where James now sat watching. "What good is a heavyweight championship when my people are dying in a war that isn't theirs? What good is money and fame if I can't face myself in the mirror each morning?" As the reel finished, James remained motionless, overwhelmed by what he'd found. This wasn't just rare footage. It was a missing piece of history that revealed the true depth of Ali's character. The fighter's eloquence had landed more powerfully than any punch he'd thrown in the ring. James carefully rewound the film, his mind racing. He needed to track down the interviewer, discover why this footage never aired, and most importantly, share Ali's powerful words with the world. What began as a simple research trip had just become a journey that would change his career, and perhaps even change how history remembered one of its most complex heroes. The morning sun reflected off the gleaming glass facade of the Hamilton Media Building as James handed his visitor's badge to the security guard. The 50-story skyscraper housed the corporate headquarters of multiple news networks, including the one that had absorbed the small station where Ali's interview had been filmed. "Mr. Reynolds will see you now," announced the executive assistant, leading James through double mahogany doors into an office larger than his entire apartment. Edward Reynolds, media mogul with an estimated net worth of $300 million, rose from behind a desk crafted from a single slab of Italian marble. At 72, he still maintained the commanding presence that had helped him build his empire. "So you're the filmmaker who's been pestering my staff about some old interview," he said, gesturing for James to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than James's car. "I appreciate you making time for me," James replied, setting his $15,000 camera equipment on the floor beside him. "I've discovered footage of Muhammad Ali from 1967 that I believe was intentionally suppressed." Reynolds' expression remained impassive as he pressed a button on his desk. The wall behind him transformed into a screen displaying the first few minutes of the interview James had found. "I had our archives digitize it when you called," Reynolds explained. "Interesting piece of history, I'll grant you that." James leaned forward. "The interviewer, I believe it was Thomas Keller. Why wasn't this ever broadcast?" Reynolds walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, his reflection superimposed on the view of the city he helped shape. His custom-tailored suit, which James guessed cost upward of $7,000, barely wrinkled as he moved. "Thomas Keller was my mentor," Reynolds said finally. This interview was supposed to be his big break, an exclusive with the controversial champion who just refused the draft. The network executives expected Keller to nail Ali to the wall, expose him as unpatriotic, unintelligent, a draft dodger who deserved what was coming. "But that's not what happened," James prompted. Reynolds turned, something like regret flickering across his face. "No. Ali was thoughtful, principled, even prophetic. And Thomas..." He paused. Thomas found himself agreeing with him. "You can see it in the footage, the moment when his questioning changes from adversarial to genuinely curious. So the network killed it. The sponsors would have pulled out overnight if it had aired." This was 1967, young man. The country was deeply divided, but media companies knew which side paid the bills. James absorbed this information, his documentary taking shape in his mind. What happened to Thomas Keller? He resigned. The next day, left journalism entirely. Reynolds returned to his desk, pressing another button that revealed a wall safe behind an original Basquiat worth millions. He removed a leather-bound journal and placed it before James. "He gave me this before he died 10 years ago, said someone might need it someday." James carefully opened the journal, finding meticulous notes about the Ali interview, including Keller's personal reflections and the address of a remote cabin in Michigan where he'd spent his remaining years. "Why are you helping me?" James asked. Looking up at the media tycoon, Reynolds considered the question, adjusting his platinum Patek Philippe watch that James recognized as a limited edition valued at nearly $1 million. "Perhaps it's time for the truth. Or perhaps I'm just an old man trying to balance the scales before I meet my maker." He smiled thinly. "Take the journal. Find the rest of the story. But understand, powerful people buried this once. They might. Try again." As James left the opulent office, journal in hand, he felt equal parts exhilarated and unsettled. He was now venturing beyond a simple documentary into something far more significant and potentially dangerous. The words of the young Muhammad Ali echoed in his mind. "What good is money and fame if I can't face myself in the mirror each morning?" The tires of James's rental car crunched over gravel as he approached the woodland cabin that had been Thomas Keller's final home. After Reynolds' warning, James had worked quickly, interviewing former network employees and piecing together the events surrounding the suppressed interview. What emerged was a story more compelling than he'd anticipated. Keller hadn't merely resigned, he'd been blacklisted throughout the industry after attempting to leak Ali's interview to other networks. His promising career destroyed. He'd retreated to this remote Michigan property, purchased with his life savings. The cabin door opened before James could knock. A woman in her 60s regarded him warily, her resemblance to photos James had seen of Keller unmistakable. "Sarah Keller?" he asked, camera slung over his shoulder. "You're the filmmaker who called," she stated, not a question. I've been wondering when someone would finally come asking about my father and Muhammad Ali. Inside, the cabin was modest but comfortable, its walls covered with framed photographs, many featuring a younger Thomas Keller alongside various historical figures. Dad was a collector of moments, Sarah explained, noticing James's interest. Even after he left journalism, he documented everything. He believed the truth had its own timeline, that it would emerge when the world was ready to hear it. She disappeared into another room, returning with a sealed box labeled simply, Ali Complete. He kept this separate from his other archives, she said, placing it on the rustic oak coffee table between them. Said it contained the most important 25 minutes of his professional life. James carefully opened the box, finding not only the complete unedited interview footage, but also extensive notes, correspondence, and most surprisingly, letters exchanged between Keller and Ali over the decades that followed. They became friends? James asked, astonished. Sarah nodded, pouring tea into delicate china cups that seemed at odds with the rustic surroundings. Muhammad visited this cabin 3 times over the years. The last time was in 2001, when his Parkinson's had advanced significantly. Dad was already battling cancer by then. She handed James a photograph of the 2 elderly men sitting on the cabin's porch, both visibly affected by illness, but smiling broadly. What many people never understood about Muhammad Ali, Sarah continued, was that his greatest fight wasn't in the ring. It was his struggle to be heard, truly heard, beyond the spectacle, beyond the controversy. James found himself examining a document that made his heart race, a contract between a major publishing house and Keller, dated 1995, for a book about the interview and its aftermath. Attached was a cancellation notice and a check for $1 million. They paid him not to publish? James asked. Several interested parties contributed to that payment, Sarah confirmed. Powerful men who'd built careers on the war Muhammad opposed, media executives who'd suppressed similar stories. Even then, decades later, they feared what would happen if people heard Muhammad's unfiltered thoughts about war, about race, about America's soul. James looked up, meeting her gaze. And your father accepted the money? Sarah's laugh held no humor. Look around, Mr. Cooper. Does this look like the home of someone who kept $1 million? She walked to a framed newspaper clipping showing the opening of the Keller Ali Youth Center in Detroit's poorest neighborhood. Dad and Muhammad built 3 centers with that money. Places where kids could learn, box, read, spaces where they could dream beyond their circumstances. The final condition of Dad's silence was that the source of the funding remain anonymous. James sat back, struggling to process everything. Why share all this with me now? Sarah's expression softened. Because of what's happening in the world today. Because young people are again being sent to wars they don't understand. Because the powerful still try to silence the truth-tellers. She leaned forward. And because both my father and Muhammad believed that words, the right words, spoken with conviction, can land harder than any punch. The documentary premiere at the Sundance Film Festival drew an unexpected crowd. James had worked feverishly for 6 months, interviewing Sarah Keller, Edward Reynolds, surviving network executives, and cultural historians. At the center of it all remained the lost interview, 25 minutes that captured Ali at his most eloquent and determined. As the lights dimmed in the theater, James felt a wave of anxiety. The film had already generated controversy, with several prominent figures attempting to block its release. Only the public support of Ali's family and the unexpected backing of Reynolds, who had contributed $5 million to its completion, and marketing had kept the project alive. On screen, the story unfolded, not just of Ali's powerful words, but of a journalist who sacrificed his career for integrity, of a media system that chose expedience over truth, and of an unlikely friendship that flowered in the aftermath. The audience sat spellbound as the complete interview played, hearing Ali articulate his position with a clarity that transcended time. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," came Ali's famous line, now given full context by the footage. "No Viet Cong ever called me nigger. Why should they ask me to put on a uniform and go 10,000 miles from home and drop bombs and bullets on brown people while so-called Negro people in Louisville are treated like dogs?" When the credits rolled, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Among them were familiar faces, sports legends, civil rights activists, and, surprisingly, several elderly men James recognized as former network executives who had initially suppressed. The interview, at the reception afterward, held in a luxury hotel ballroom where champagne flowed freely and hors d'oeuvres were served on silver platters worth thousands, James found himself approached by one of these men. "You've created something important," said the former executive, now in his 90s. "We were wrong back then. We thought we were protecting America, but we were only protecting a version of it that couldn't last." Before James could respond, the crowd parted to reveal Lonnie Ali, Muhammad's widow, elegant in her evening wear, accompanied by several family members. "My husband would have loved this," she told James, taking his hands in hers. "He always said that his words would outlast his fights, that when the boxing was forgotten, what he said and what he stood for would remain." She presented James with a small box. Inside was Ali's gold Rolex watch, inscribed with the date he had refused induction. Muhammad left instructions that this should go to whoever finally told the complete story, she explained. He somehow knew that one day someone would find that interview and understand its importance. The watch, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, felt impossibly heavy in James' hands. "I can't accept this," he stammered. "It's not for you to keep," Lonnie clarified with a smile. "It's for you to pass on to the next truth-teller when the time comes. That's how legacies work." Later that evening, as the celebration continued around him, James stepped outside onto the balcony overlooking the festival crowds below. Sarah Keller joined him, both reflecting on the journey that had brought them there. "My father used to say that Muhammad's greatest gift wasn't his speed or his power," she said quietly. "It was his understanding that some fights happen in the ring, but the most important ones happen in the heart and mind." James nodded, thinking about the ripples already spreading from the documentary's release. Schools were requesting screening rights. Conversations about journalistic integrity and civil courage had reignited. Young athletes were publicly questioning the causes they were expected to endorse. "In the end," James replied, "Ali's words landed blows that are still being felt today, not because he was the greatest boxer, but because he was willing to stand alone when standing together meant compromising what he knew was right." Below them, a new generation moved through the streets, unaware that the world they inhabited had been partly shaped by a 25-minute interview that almost vanished from history, by words that proved stronger and more enduring than even the mightiest punch. If you've made it this far and felt every word, don't leave without subscribing. I tell these stories with my heart in my hands to reach people like you, who feel, who get emotional, who live. If this truly touched you, give back, comment, subscribe, come be part of this family with me until the next video.